Kentucky basketball has a matchup against an SEC team they're supposed to beat by double digits, but I think the Georgia Bulldogs may actually be pretty good.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs. I know that earlier on in the season, when talking about the Bulldogs, I kind of disregarded them. But after picking up a couple of SEC wins, I think the Bulldogs may actually be pretty good. Going to break this matchup down today. I'm going to talk about the individual players for Georgia that have kind of made them tick over these past few weeks. Going to talk about the offense, the defense, what's good, what's bad, how does Kentucky size up against them, all of that coming up and more. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. And if you've been listening on podcasting, if you're tuned in there now, make sure to subscribe on whatever outlet you are tuned in on. Let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky versus Georgia. I believe, according to Vegas, the Wildcats are favored by 11.5 to 12, depending on where you look. But Georgia, I think, may actually not be that bad. They've started off their SEC slate 3-1 with a couple of tough road trips to Missouri and South Carolina that they ended up winning both of those contests by pretty similar margins. They defeated Arkansas at home by 10 in what was a really interesting game that we'll talk about later on in the show. And then they lost by 6 to Tennessee at home, a game that they had just about won that Tennessee ended up coming back in. What do the Georgia Bulldogs do well? Why do I think that they're pretty good? Well, they don't turn the ball over on offense, and they get to the foul line quite a bit. Whenever you watch this Georgia team, I don't think that there's necessarily a ton of pace happening within their offense. I wouldn't say that they're a slow team. I wouldn't say that they're an extremely fast one either, and that's going to come into play here when we talk about how this game may go down. But what they do in their half-court offense is I think they kind of maintain their composure. They don't freak out. They don't turn the ball over a ton, and they're able to consistently drive in or get somebody in the post and get to the foul line. The other thing that Georgia does really well outside of get to the charity stripe is they're one of the better three-point shooting teams in this conference. I see on different games that Georgia's played so far this year that they really do like to work inside out at times. It's just not as quick as some of these other high-octane offenses that you may see. They're one of the better three-point shooting teams in this conference, shooting 35.2%. The only guy in their rotation, RJ Melendez, is shooting sub 30%. He's shooting 21.7%. Everybody else is shooting 41.5, 36.4, 34.5, 34.4, 36.9. Those are their top, 6 scorers there. And Melendez is kind of bogging down their three-point percentage. But overall, I think this is a good shooting team, which could cause Kentucky some problems. I also mentioned the pace. They play with some pace at times. A couple of their wins this year have included some really fun offense up and down the court, but I wouldn't say that they're faster than Kentucky. I wouldn't say even that they're one of the faster teams in the SEC, like in that top echelon of like maybe 5 to 4 teams that are really cranking it up on a given night. So Georgia, I think their offense has some promising things going for them. Their defense, though, statistically significantly better than their offense. Their adjusted efficiency is top 45, according to KenPom. Their effective field goal percentage on defense is really solid, top 30, and they hold opponents to just 29% shooting from beyond the arc, 46.8% shooting from inside the arc. They do a good job of just kind of playing overall solid defense. And they have the ability to do that because they are really physical I wouldn't say on the defensive end in terms of like how they actually acted out, but in terms of their size and length. Georgia is one of the taller teams in this conference. They're also one of the bigger teams in this conference, and when we talk about matchups, we'll break down how that may impact the game as well. They've hit some clutch shots during SEC play thus far. They hit a couple of really big-time buckets against Arkansas later on in that game. They also hit some really big shots against South Carolina down the stretch, where they were able to kind of help close those games out whenever they did get kind of shaky. They didn't do it against Tennessee, so this team has the ability to kind of break down there at the end if the opportunity presents itself. But more often than not, they've had some guys who, let's just say, are not as efficient from the floor as maybe some other players in the SEC. They've been able to step up and hit mid-range shots, outside shots whenever the opportunity has arisen. So Georgia, I think, at 13-4, 3-1 in SEC play, I mean, they're a pretty solid team. I wouldn't say that they're a great team, but I would say they're pretty good, and they've got a chance at finishing 500 to above 500 in the conference this year, depending on how a couple of their road matchups shake out. So props to Georgia so far for looking pretty solid to open up SEC play. 3 players that you need to be aware of as far as 3 players that do some really good work for them. We'll break down matchups further in a second. Jabri Abdur-Rahim is their leading scorer. He's the guy that they go to consistently, 12.8 points per game, shooting 41.5% from beyond the arc. Their most dominant player on the ball is R.J. Melendez, that we talked about earlier, who's only shooting 21.7% from the floor and only averaging 9.8 points, but he shoots a lot, and he has the ability to heat up, so he's somebody to watch out for. I'll actually give you 4 players here. Noah Thomason, the second leading scorer on this team, kind of quiet in the different games that I watched, but 12.4 points, second leading scorer on this squad, shoots the best out of anybody in the top 4 for the Bulldogs from the floor, shooting about 44% and 36% from beyond the arc. And then the final guy I want to be highlight here, Russell Chua, however you want to pronounce that, the transfer from South Florida. We talked about him on the show way back last summer when talking about what was going on in the portal and how the Wildcats could take advantage of it. We talked about Russell, talked about how physical he was at 7 foot, 270 pounds. The dude is a load. It is going to be very difficult, I think, for Kentucky to kind of keep him under wraps. He's not statistically a dominant player, but I think that he could show some problems here for the Kentucky Wildcats and their defense. So we talked about the good for Georgia, pretty balanced team, I would say. Let's talk about the bad here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season has wrapped up. The playoffs are in full effect right now, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the app that they've got is super easy to use. So many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. They've got bets in the new Explore tab. They've got a parlay hub in case you want to check out some of the most popular parlays out there and more on top of that. So you need to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. That is FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Man, this week has just flown by. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the show on YouTube or on podcast, wherever you are tuned in, subscribe. We're going to have a really fun SEC slate here. We've got a stretch of games that Kentucky is projected to win. Talked about that on yesterday's show with Andrew Stefaniak of Wildcats Today. You want to go check that out. It's on the YouTube and on the podcast feed. Kentucky's got some momentum. Now's a good time to sub up and talk about what's going on here with Big Blue Nation. So we talked about Georgia and what they do well and what they have done well so far this season. Let's talk a little bit about the bad here for the Bulldogs and Mike White, who, in case you didn't know, did move over from Florida and is now head coach of UGA. R.J. Melendez is their most utilized player out of this rotation. We've talked about KenPom a lot here on the show. Let's go to the numbers here real quick. They break down, KenPom does, the different players on a given roster by how much they contribute, how often they're used on possessions, the percentage of the time that they're used on possessions. And R.J. Melendez is used on 25.6% of UGA's possessions, and that is tops on their roster by a couple of percentage points. The problem with RJ Melendez, like we stated earlier, is that he's used on all these different possessions, shots, assists, etc., but he's not particularly efficient from the floor. He shoots 38.1% from the floor as a whole, which is just not good. It's just bad. And 21.7% from beyond the arc, which is the worst on the team and, frankly, pitiful. Whether or not Kentucky's able to keep him under wraps, I think is going to be important. I think that the Wildcats have the ability at times to just kind of leave some guys that even don't shoot well open, and I think Georgia could definitely take advantage of that. I think their half-court offense has some promise, has some abilities to break the Wildcats down. Will it throughout this entire game? Again, we'll talk about that whenever we talk about matchups and how this thing, I think, is going to play out. But Melendez is the most utilized player, but the least efficient, I think, out of their rotation. The team also doesn't shoot well from the floor overall. We mentioned Melendez shoots about 38% from the floor. Georgia as a whole is just really not looking good in the effective field goal percentage department, shooting 49.5%. Inside the arc, they shoot 47%, which is really low. It's one of the worst numbers in the SEC. They're a good three-point shooting team, but they cannot hit consistently inside. I think it's because of the fact that they take a lot of weird jumpers, and that leads to some ineffective offense, as we have talked about quite a bit here on the show, believe it or not. Getting to the charity stripe has been really important for them this season. They've leaned on that more than a lot of other teams throughout the college basketball and the SEC, I guess I should say. But Georgia does not do a good job of shooting well from the floor overall at times, and especially inside the arc. Their assist-to-turnover ratio also is not that great. You go look at their statistics. You can check this out quite literally anywhere, ESPN, CBS, or wherever you check out your basketball statistics. 12.6 assists per game, which is not terrible, but they have 11.1 turnovers per contest, and that discrepancy there between assist-to-turnover ratio is just not, I think, it's not terrible, but it's not great. And I think that may come into play here when talking about the important things, again, in this matchup. Their defense also does not create a ton of havoc. I know I talked earlier about how they are pretty good at holding opponents to low shooting percentages, but they don't create a lot of turnover. I think actually in 2022, we talked about this quite a bit with the Georgia Bulldogs, who I think were 6-26 that season, about how their defense just does not give any sort of push whatsoever to the opponent. And obviously that was underneath Tom Crean. You're looking now here underneath Mike White, They just don't force a lot of turnovers, and they don't grab a lot of offensive rebounds. They don't create a lot of steals. They don't create a lot of blocks. They don't force a lot of mistakes on the opponent. And the average possession length on defense is pretty slow for the Bulldogs, despite their overall adjusted tempo being top 100. So they just kind of let the opponent work, and they utilize, I think, their height and their physicality towards the end of possessions to kind of close things out, just what it looks like, both on film and on, I say film, the highlight reels of different games that you can watch on YouTube, and that's what it reflects here in the numbers. So Georgia doesn't do that very well. And then the final thing I want to point out here, this is a bad rebounding team. At least I think it's a bad rebounding team. They're number 11 and 12 in offensive rebounding and defensive rebounding margin in the SEC. What is offensive rebounding or defensive rebounding margin? Let's say that you grab 15 rebounds, your opponent grabs 10. You have a +5 rebounding margin as a whole. Let's say you grab 5 offensive rebounds and your opponent grabs 10. You have a -5 offensive rebounding margin. You get where I'm going with this? They are number 11 and number 12 in both OR and DR in the SEC, which is just simply not good. And Kim Pom reflects that on both ends of the floor. Despite being tall, despite being physically able to go and get the boards, I don't know if it's because of what Georgia likes to do schematically. I don't know if they just don't coach emphasis on that. I don't know what's going on here, but they just don't do a great job of grabbing rebounds, and it's something that Kentucky's also struggled with at times this season. How will that impact this game is going to be interesting. Will it be nothing at all? Will it be kind of split down the middle even, where neither team has a significant advantage rebounding the basketball? Not giving Georgia second chance points, I think, is going to be very important, because you're going to find situations often, I think, in this game where Georgia does end up getting rebounds and finding themselves back at the foul line, where they do so often. I hope Kentucky's able to keep them off of that line and create some opportunities in transition, which, speaking of transition, let's transition here to some of the matchups. I think Kentucky is going to be able to do some good things in this game. Also, some big-time things to watch out for when it comes to these individual players for UGA. Let's break that down in just a second. Before I do all of that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Let's say you're watching this on Friday evening, or you're watching this just hours before the game, before Kentucky takes on Georgia, and you're in Lexington, you want to go to Rupp. You may be looking for some last-minute tickets, and it can be stressful. You can kind of panic over it. You can look at all these different options and see that maybe the prices aren't exactly what you're looking for, and maybe there's some added fees that you weren't expecting looking at some different outlets, but you should check out Game Time, and all of that worry will go away because you shouldn't have to worry when buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the different sporting events, comedy, music, and theater events near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. They have deals on events right up to the start of them, even an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. You can also find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, again, comedy, theater, and more. On top of that, I used Game Time quite a bit this past college football season to go to a few different games. Absolutely loved it. Very straightforward, very easy to use. Could get your tickets in a matter of seconds. You can see your seat. And to be honest with you, there were a couple of college football games that I went to where there were some really, really nice photos, some really, really great deals for seats. And then you got there to the game, and it was like, this is even better in person than I could have imagined. So you need to check out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, wrapping up the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. So we've got the good, we've got the bad for Georgia. Let's talk a little bit about these matchups. What is Kentucky going to do in this game? I think the big thing here is Kentucky should try and speed this team up. I said this in the Missouri game, and I'll say it here, despite Georgia, I think, bringing significantly more tempo to Rupp. I think Kentucky's got to get out and run in this one. Now, this could cause problems because of Georgia's ability to score, I think, in their half-court offense, not being the most efficient from the floor. They can hit some threes, though. They can hit some transition threes as well. So this may end up backfiring if Kentucky does elect to do that, which I think stylistically they're not going to really slow things down. I thought about this yesterday after I did an episode with Andrew Stefaniak talking about Kentucky's defense, and I sat there and thought about, how does Kentucky's pace affect their defense? Because you go and look at KenPom, who I love, and Kentucky is, 58th in adjusted defensive efficiency? That's not bad. That's not terrible. Their effective field goal percentage, not bad. Their block percentage, pretty darn good. Their three-point defense, pretty okay. Their defense from the floor, not that bad. But I think it may be the extra possessions that this speedy offense gives their defense that creates all these extra point opportunities. That could be a factor here. So speeding things up and going blow for blow against Georgia may hurt Kentucky on defense a little bit. But I have trust in Kentucky's offense, and I have trust in their ability to play, I think, in a tempo-style game more effectively than Georgia can. Because here are some things that you need to know about UK and UGA. Kentucky has played 14 of their 16 games this season with a pace of at least 70 on KenPom. KenPom tracks the pace of the games, how fast or slow they go. And a pace of 70 is somewhat slightly above average too. Hey, we're picking things up here. Kentucky's played at least 14 of their 16 games with a pace of 70 or better. Georgia has only played 9 of their 17 games with a pace of 70 or better on KenPom. And they went 5-4 in those contests. All of Georgia's losses have come in these faster games. And I don't think it's because Georgia can't run. I think it may be better to try and speed up their offense a little bit so they don't have time to set things up. Because as fast as this team may like to run at times, I think at the end of the day, Mike White and company seem more comfortable operating in that half court, moving the ball around, looking for touches in the post, looking to kick it back out for threes in a more slower, more traditional style, I guess, than compared to what you see in the modern game. Mike White, by the way, I think commonly utilized the Princeton offense during his time at Florida. I don't know how much they do that here because the Princeton offense, if I'm not mistaken, leans to a more slow, methodical style of play, which you do see again at points out of Georgia, and I think it's kind of their strength if they can hit some of those 3-point shots in the half-court offense. But I think that Kentucky will benefit here from getting out with their guards and looking to run in transition, looking to the rim, looking to the outside. And I think Georgia, in turn, if they elect to speed things up and Kentucky can actually get back on defense and just play average defense, I think Kentucky can create a little bit of havoc on their own. I think that they can speed things up and get Georgia out of sync. Those 4 losses that Georgia had so far this season have come to either quicker-paced teams with efficient offenses or to efficient offenses who just chose to pick up the pace against Georgia, and they ended up being successful. 4 losses this season, by the way, to Oregon to open the season, and then they had Miami and Providence in back-to-back games in the first 5 games of the year, and then they lost to Tennessee here at the beginning of conference play after essentially having that game in hand if they could just close it out. So Georgia's a good team. I think they're a good team. They play well with pace. They play well in the half court. Their defense is the best aspect of their game, but there are different flaws that you see that may concern in this matchup. With Kentucky being at home, with them having that advantage, I think Kentucky pulls this one out. I think they win this game. I think it's a little bit closer maybe than Vegas predicts. Right now, KenPom has Kentucky winning this game by 10. I say they win by 6. I think Kentucky wins this game by 6 or 7, maybe less than that. I think it's going to be a tight, contested one. Kentucky's got to be able to focus up on defense, man. They weren't able to do it in the second half against Mississippi State. They weren't really able to do it in the first half perfectly against MSU either. They've got to find something. They have to have a good game here where you see them show the ability to play good or average defense. Because right now it is slightly underneath average by conference standards, and it will certainly cause problems whenever the NCAA tournament gets here. But if you score 85 to 90 points a game, it's typically not going to matter, but you will have slumps. I hope tomorrow is not a game where Kentucky's in a slump, because Georgia's a team that has proven already through 4 games, hey, we can hit some clutch shots. We may give up a lead or 2 here, but they have the ability to win games, close games out. Justin Edwards and Antonio Reeves versus Abdur Rahim and then RJ Melendez is going to be interesting. How does Kentucky handle these I guess, big-time guards / wings that Georgia has? That's going to be interesting. DJ Wagner, Rob Dillingham versus Justice Hill, somebody coming off the bench for Georgia, who is, I think, their second leading guard with 9.5 points, also shooting 34.5% from deep. I think he leads the team in assists per game at 3.5 per contest. A little bit of a shorter guard here. I think came from Longwood a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And then Trey Mitchell and Ugun Onyenso, obviously, versus Russell Chua, 270 pounds. That is going to be a dogfight down low. Can Kentucky handle it without fouling? Can Kentucky handle it and get some stops at the rim? We'll have to wait and see. I don't think Thiero is going to be available for this game, by the way, which is a little concerning. I have no idea what's going on there. You'd like to think the general soreness that they keep saying he has. I mean, it's got to be some serious soreness for him to have been out for several games now. So I don't know what's happening there. Hopefully he's able to come back. And let me know what you think about this game in the comments below, whether you think Kentucky's going to win this one or not. Give me a final score prediction as well. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and follow the show on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.